Again, but welcome. Glad to have you here. Today's going to be about presenting as a team. My name is JD Clockadale, and you just heard Joey Asher. We're really excited to have you here. For those who haven't been on our calls, Joey and I are partners at Speechworks. So we've been around for about 36 years. Joey's been running the company for the last 20 years, and we work together to help lots of companies all over the country and across the globe, actually, for virtual trainings. So we're excited to have you here. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Joey to get us started. Joey, get us cranking here.
Yeah, so once again, if you're just joining, go to the chat box. The first thing I want everyone to do is go to the chat box right now and tell us the biggest challenge that you face when you have to present as a team. What is the biggest challenge you face when you have to present as a team? There's been some good ones already here that have been interesting. Let's see. Chad, I was just chatting with Chad, keeping it on track, making sure that there's sort of this unified message. Sarah says, hey, Sarah, how are you, by the way? Thanks for joining. Transitioning between speakers. Sarah, can you unmute for a second? I know Sarah from having worked with her. Sarah, what do you mean transitioning? Are you there? Can you unmute? You go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes when you're doing a group presentation, it's hard to tell when you're going to stop talking and when they're going to come in, and those transitions can be a little bit awkward.
Yeah, so when it seems like you're you're almost like presenting in parallel, and it's like, well, I'm going to start, and then somebody else is going to start, but there's not any real sense of true coordination. And so the reason I picked on you there, Sarah, is because you're kind of putting your finger right on the sort of the essence of the challenge with presenting as a team, which is seeming like a team. You have to seem like people that actually have worked together before, that have some sort of sense of coordination. I think Chad said to have a sense of congruence. I like the word congruence, so I'm just glad that you use that word, Chad. Yeah. So the issue is how do we present well as a team? How do we seem like a team? And so we're going to talk about that this afternoon. We think there's three things you need to do. Number one, you have to rehearse as a team. You have to actually rehearse together as a team. Number two, you have to introduce yourselves as a team, and we're going to talk about that as well, and then handle Q&A as a team. By the way, I'll talk about the first one, JD will talk about the second one, and then maybe we'll sort of tag team it on the third one. We're going to be working ourselves sort of tag teaming back and forth. One more thing about the our general ground rules for these calls. Several of you I know have been on these calls before with us. The ground rules are there's really no rules. Please jump in, ask questions, unmute yourself and just jump in. It's fine to be rude, say, hey, Joey, hey, JD, I have a question. Or you can go to the chat box. We're going to be monitoring the chat box as we go. But let's start with rehearsing as a team. Let's start with the first point, which is rehearsing as a team. And sort of here's the simple point, is that if you want to come across well as a team, you have to rehearse as a team. I cannot tell you how many times I will work with teams and I'll say, do you guys actually practice together? And they say, well, what we do is we actually practice individually and then we sort of get together. It's really not a good idea. You have to practice the whole thing as a team. And I will tell you, the ones that do it really, really well together allocate a good chunk of time for those rehearsals. And here's the way to do a good team rehearsal. You start the presentation, let's say it's a 20-minute presentation. You start the presentation, you go all the way through from beginning to end without stopping like it's a play. This is very, very important. You have to go all the way through without stopping from beginning to end like it's a play. The way a lot of people do this is they'll start, I'll say, let's say it's me, I'll start, and then JD will stop me and say, hey, Joey, why don't you stop and why don't you say this instead? It's not a good idea because that way you never get that congruence that Chad talked about. You never get that unified feel because you're constantly starting and stopping. You need to go all the way through from beginning to end. Now, I will say that the problem with doing it this way is that first time you do it is usually pretty ugly. It's usually what I would call sort of the ugly pancake. That first time through is the ugly pancake. Those of you who cook pancakes for breakfast know that first pancake it's kind of ugly. It's usually not a pretty pancake. That's okay. It's part of the process. And then the second and the third pancakes get progressively better. So that's the idea. The other thing that you need to do is you need to transition effectively. So JD, what do we mean when we talk about effective transitions? How do transitions go?
Well, transitions, you need to act like I've seen a couple of comments here kind of related to this, is that you got to seem like you're on the same page and you're coordinated. The one that I thought was interesting the other day, we were in a rehearsal and this woman gave this great piece where she was talking about one of her points, and there was someone going after her and she said, well, that's how we're going to make sure that we stay under budget. And then the other guy goes, so do you want me to talk now? It's just awkward. There's got to be some coordination between the two.
You have to actually practice the transitions. This is an important part of the thing. So what is a good transition, JD? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do that. People ask us about this all the time, how to do a good transition, but what is the best way to actually do that?
All right, well, I'm going to pick on my friend Tiffany here, since from I guess we've had lots of people come through from your oldly named company. So let's say that I'm Tiffany. I'm just going to make some stuff up, okay? Mm-hmm. Let's say the point is that we're gonna, I don't know, Tiffany. What are two good things to talk about your company? Just pick two cool things.
Oh gosh, you're putting me on the spot. Let's see. That we're doing virtual tours right now,
okay,
and just engaging residents in a different way.
Okay, so let's say that Tiffany's going to talk about engaging residents, and I'm going to talk about virtual tours. So when I'm done talking about virtual tours, I say, so that's how we do our virtual tours. So hopefully you got a really good sense of how good we do those. Now I want to turn it over to Tiffany to talk about blah, blah, blah. And then Tiffany, when Tiffany's done, she can't just go, thanks, JD. She has to say, great, thank you so much. And she has to have this nice energy. So I have to sound excited to give it to her. But she's also got to sound excited that she heard what she heard, but also she's excited to talk about what she wants to talk about. So Tiffany, I'm going to transition to you. I messed up the second point, but whatever. So that's how we're going to do virtual tours. Hopefully you got a really good sense of that. Now I'm excited to turn over to Tiffany, who's going to talk about blah, blah, blah. Tiffany?
Thanks, JD. So once you have your virtual tours, then you can start learning how to engage with your residents.
That's it right there. This
is so ironic, though, because I just texted Janine, who's on this class. To
so that's a nice, smooth, exciting transition between two teammates.
I'm the person that stops every time and forgets to transition. So this is.
There you go. And it looks like from the points here, I'm noticing that transitions are an issue. It seems like people are on the same page. So yeah, so there you go.
Yeah, there's my old friend Josh from my newspaper days made a really good point. Josh, unmute yourself. Tell us what you're talking about here.
I have been victim of many presentations at which the speakers don't seem to know or like each other. And each comes with his or her own agenda. They say what they're going to say and they stop talking. I think one of you just imitated this, actually, JD. And what I like to see and what I like to participate in is an awareness of the other people on the panel, occasionally deferring and saying, Diane knows more about this than I do. What do you think? And when you question each other, it seems as if you're working together and appreciate each other's knowledge and wisdom, and that conveys a sense of teamwork in a very positive way. And it's a rarity, what I'm describing, because again, people come with the agenda they want and then they stop talking.
Well, and it's a really good point, and Josh is talking about this idea of just seeming like you know each other and like each other. And, he mentioned in his study, you can turn it over by asking a question, say, hey, Josh, or hey, JD, what do you think of this? But there's just the sense of that you know each other, that you like each other, that you're familiar with each other. That is the idea here. So that's the basic idea. But it's a really good point. Thank you, Josh. What about JD? JD, what about the problem of when you're not speaking? Like, we often rehearse what we actually say. We rehearse the transitions, but what about rehearsing what I do when I'm not talking? Like, what am I supposed to do when I don't say anything?
Yeah, so let's put this in virtual format. By a show of ones in the chat box, how many people, if you're doing a team presentation, or even in person, I guess it doesn't matter. Some people are going back to in person. Anybody find it awkward trying to figure out what you do when you're just standing there or just sitting there and the camera's staring at you? Put a 1 if you think it's a little, you're trying to figure out, what do I do?
We see a lot of ones coming up.
No. So it's okay. So it's awkward. Now, when you're on camera, it's challenging because you're not used to someone staring at you, which is the camera. So you really have to look at your participants. So let's say that Tracy Rowan, let's say she's speaking. I have to look engaged. I have to remember that I'm on camera. I need to look at the camera. And if Tracy's speaking, you need to act like whatever Tracy's saying is fascinating. Even if you're bored out of your mind because you've heard it 12 times in rehearsal, you have to mimic what you want the audience to be like. So you need to be looking into the camera. If she says something, nod your head, show that you're present. We did have something on a presentation where it was clear was clear that this person did not remember they were on camera. They were on camera in the middle of a presentation and they were walking around and just fidgeting with stuff. And you could see that the audience who they were presenting to was getting a little awkward. Like, what is he doing? It wasn't quite as bad as the lady who took her laptop to the restroom on Zoom. However, it was awkward. So you've got to pay attention. And it's the same thing when you're live. You got to look interested, body language, eye contact, nodding your head, and those type of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly important part of this is what you do when you're not when you're not actually center stage. I have to tell a story about one of our clients we helped. This is for those of you who are especially on sales teams and you're presenting sales presentations as a team. This was a construction client of ours, and they pitched for a big hospital opportunity and they won. They won the opportunity. And when they went to the client, they went to the CEO of the hospital. And they said, thanks, for choosing us. We're excited to get started on this project. Could you give us some feedback on the presentation and why you selected us versus the other team? And they said, well, both of your presentations were quite good, but I got to tell you, one of the team members, on the other team, it was actually the superintendent, the construction superintendent, when he was not speaking, he had this sort of blank look at me, the CEO. During the presentation, he had this sort of dead-eye stare, and he looked angry at me, and I just didn't feel comfortable, and so we selected you. And this was a $75 million project, and it was selected based only on that. So what you do when you're not on camera, when you're not actually center stage, is obviously really, really important. Another thing that's really, really important is how you do introductions. During team presentations. So, JD, what do we do when we talk about introductions? How do we introduce ourselves?
So we'll talk about two situations. There's teams that present internal stuff where you might be presenting to get a budget for a project. Maybe you're in the HR department or the IT department where you've got to do that. And then there's the sales. There's the sales situation. In either situation, we think it's super important to introduce fundamentally the exact same way. So a lot of times people get caught up in doing these long introductions at the very beginning. Look, if you're in sales and the client says, please introduce yourself, obviously you need to introduce yourself a little bit. But we think you should introduce yourself, and I think you should write this down. This is super, super important. You need to introduce yourself in the context of your role in the presentation. You introduce yourself in the context of your role as the presentation. Now, I'm going to use a construction example just because that's kind of the top of my head because I've been talking about that. Let's say that I'm the project executive. I'm leading the presentation. Okay, I'm the head of this thing, and I'm going to kick this off. And I'm going to go through my 3 key messages. I'll say, well, we're going to talk about how we're going to build a great building, how we're going to do it under budget, and how we're going to do it on time. So I'm gonna say what my 3 key messages are, and then I'm just gonna as a Hideyoshi, is that right? Am I pronouncing that right? Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, Hideyoshi. Thank you. So let's say that Tiffany, Hideyoshi, and Tracy are my team. Now what I'm gonna do is introduce them in the context of their role in this presentation. So I'd say, okay, so now that I've already had my 3 points, now let me introduce Tiffany. Tiffany is going to be our project manager for this project. She was selected for the team because she's got a long history of building successful projects, but also making sure that she's coordinating with the architects so we build a really great building. She's going to be talking about how we do that. And then Hideyoshi is going to talk about how we're going to do this on budget. Hideyoshi has this great experience. He has come under budget every single project, and he's on this team because he really knows how to coordinate with the client and make them happy. And then Tracy is going to talk about how we're going to do this on time. Tracy has an amazing track record of really doing things that can keep things on schedule. And we brought her in for this project because she has worked with these Tiffany and Hideyoshi multiple times, and they just make a great team. So does that make sense, everybody? How we introduce, you're putting them in context of their role. Now, the difference, and by the way, jump in and ask questions too. You can do it through chat or just unmute yourself. Now, in a sales environment, you might notice that I kind of talked the three people up that were going to speak. I gave them a little bit of bio. I gave them some, gave them some props and kind of said, hey, they're great because. Mm-hmm. That's important in the sales situation. It's your turn to brag about your team. It's super important because it's weird if they brag about themselves. Okay. So you're going to brag about your team. In an internal situation, the really only difference in introducing yourself is you may not say, oh, well, Tracy has this long history of blah, 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 but let's do an IT presentation. Let's say that I need budget because we've got a legacy system. We need to upgrade it and it's going to help reduce costs. So my 3 points could be, I want to talk about our legacy system and the issues we're having. I'm going to talk about how we're going to, what the new system would look like. And the third thing is the benefits that we're going to get from the new system. If I'm in an internal presentation, I might say, well, Tiffany's going to talk about the issues that we're having with the legacy system because she spent a lot of the times trying to address those issues and she really has a good handle on what's going on. Hideyoshi is going to talk about the new system. He's done a lot of research on this and he's worked directly with the vendor. So he is our expert when it comes to the new system. And Tracy's going to talk about the benefits. Tracy has really been kind of immersed in with Hideyoshi on what we can do going forward to make this system and make our company better this way. So you're not really bragging on them, but you are introducing them in context of their role and why they've been chosen to speak about that specific point. So hopefully that's making sense for everybody. Any questions on that?
All right. Well, let's keep going. If there certainly, oh wait, there might be another. Hold on, yeah, we got.
Just a couple comments.
I want to call out somebody. Ellen Short. You said that there's a challenge with people talking over one another during these presentations. Mm-hmm. I call you out, Ellen, only because I think this is particularly relevant to the next thing we want to talk about, which is Q&A. Ellen, are you there? Can you unmute for a moment?
Yes, I'm here.
So when you say people talk over one another, what are the circumstances in team presentations where that happens? Because I definitely think this is an important issue.
I think it's mainly Zoom. I think when you're not being able to see the body language and kind of read the room, you can't tell if somebody's thinking or if they're, waiting for you to speak. So I feel like that's when it mainly happens, is not being able to read the room as well.
It's definitely the case, right? Especially on these video conferences where there's sort of this awkward, gigantic piece of technology that's between us. It causes us to sort of step on one another's toes and things like that, which is a really interesting problem. I also want to talk about the problem of how do we make sure we come across well coordinated during a Q&A, and sort of how do we handle Q&A well? Because this issue of people talking over one another in the Q&A setting is also really, really important. And so the question is how do we do Q&A well in a team presentation? And the answer, I don't know, is not particularly hard, but it's important, which is you need to work and practice the Q&A as a team. All the things that we say about handling Q&A in non-team presentations, we want you to think about that in a team setting as well. You need to write out all the possible questions, but then you need to decide who's going to take what question. So if we go back to the team that JD set up, Hideyoshi, Tiffany, and Tracy, we would decide which of those three are going to take which questions, and then we would make sure that we practice them. The next key thing is we need to make sure that if Tiffany answers the question, that Tiffany gives the answer, and then that's it. Tracy should not go in and try and follow up on that answer. JD, why is it not a good idea for one person to answer the question, then another person to go in and answer it again. You have to unmute, JD. You got to unmute. JD, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Gotcha. I'm sorry, I was typing chat box responses while Joey was talking, so I apologize. We're doing two things at once. I guess I would ask everyone on the call, like, why is it weird to do that? Why is it weird to over answer or pile on or bolt tighten as we have heard it before? Why is that? Someone just type in here. Why is that awkward?
Here's a question. During Q&A, should you plan who should answer different types of questions? I think that's Tom Bonner is asking that question, and it's a great question. The answer is yes. You definitely.
Okay. This is good. Hideyoshi said is give the impression of not being a team. I think that's a big one. I think, and on top of that, it also gives a sense that whoever just answered the question is not credible. You just basically said whatever they said is not really good. So let me make sure that I make sure it's good. And do you guys know who the biggest offenders of this are? It's usually the biggest executive in the room. They cannot resist. If you're one of the big executives, I'm sorry, but it's true. It's like they can't resist diving in and doing this. Yes, undermine your teammate's response. Exactly, Matthew.
JD used the term bolt tightening. What do you mean? That's a great phrase. One of our clients loves to use that term. What does bolt tightening mean, JD?
I don't know. Let's say that I'm looking at, I got a name here, Ryan Lance. Let's just say, Ryan, you answered a question, and I go, well, let me add a little bit to that. It's almost like, well, the bolt's not tight enough, but I'm definitely the one who can screw that thing down a little bit tighter. It's just, there's no need for it. Just let the answer lay by itself.
I just like the phrase bolt tightening.
Bolt tightening.
I think that's a cool phrase. Yeah, but yeah, you guys are all right all over it. You're undermining your teammate, and then all the other rules around Q&A apply as well, which is you should keep your answers short. What you really want, the best result for a Q&A session in a team presentation is lots of questions going back and forth, and so therefore what you want is short answers. You want nice, short, tight answers. So that's sort of the most important thing. Plan out the questions. Make sure. By the way, what if you'll plan when you plan your presentation? One of the things that often comes up is well, what if they ask a question and we're not sure who should take the question? Maybe we've rehearsed it, maybe we haven't. What do we do in that circumstance? JD?
Well, I think you need you need a quarterback. You need somebody who can manage the chaos when we're not sure what to do. So, for example, if I get a question that we really haven't prepared for, I've got to be ready to say, you know what? That's probably more of. I'm just looking at Nathan Hawkins' name on the screen. That's more of Nathan's area. So, Nathan, I'm going to turn over to Nathan to answer that question. Nathan, and then I'm going to give him a little bit of time to think about it, but then I'm going to turn over to Nathan. And Nathan's going to have to do the best job with that answer that he can, but it makes it seem that we're coordinated because you don't want to do this. I've seen this too many times. Someone asks that random question and everyone goes, they're just staring around looking at something. And it's even weirder on virtual because then you have 5 people on the team who aren't saying anything. So you got to have a good quarterback who can pass this stuff along and make sure that it gets answered.
Here was a comment that I thought was really interesting. Someone talked about the idea that is it okay for me to say, well, I'd like to add on or adding to so-and-so's really good point. I think you have to be careful about phrasing it in such a way. I think the best way, if you really feel like you need to get somebody else involved, the best way to do it is for the person who started the answer to hand it off and say, well, here's my quick answer, and I'd like to, to elaborate on that. Let me turn it over to JD, who really is a true expert in this area. I think it's better for the person who gets the question first to turn it over, but for the other person to sort of jump in, I think that's a challenge. It makes it seem it raises all the issues we've been talking about, which is you seem to undermine your teammate. We're running a little bit out of time. JD, is anything else we need to say before we wrap up?
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining us on a Friday. Hopefully in your area of the world, you're able to get at least out and about, even with a mask or a bandana around your face, something of that nature. I've been wearing bandanas. That's kind of my thing. But thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We really enjoyed it. We have recorded this. We're going to send it out so you can feel free to pass it along to your team. And if we can be of any help in 2020, please let us know. We appreciate it. Have a good one, everyone. Great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
All the fans out there.